Hey guys, Mr. Kyle, Myers Mathematics, and let's just jump right into it. So, by the way, happy 2020. We're in the roaring 20s. Crazy how it's already been so long, and anyways, just read about it. In 20s, all kinds of crazy stuff happened. Hopefully, we don't go into a depression next decade. We'll see. But let's just jump right into how to complete the square. So, what you're going to need to complete the square is first and foremost the magic formula. Okay, so I'm going to give you the magic formula. Here's the magic formula. B over 2 squared equals C. There it is. Okay, if you have the magic formula, you can complete the square easily. Boom, there we go. Video done. Just kidding. So all you need though is for real, you need B over 2 quantity squared equals C. So if you're like, wait, B, C, what's B and C? Well, if you're just learning this right now, what you need to know is that B and C come from this thing called standard form. Okay, so ax squared plus bx plus c. All right, so there's the B and the C. Here's the B, here's the C. Okay, so you actually don't need this A thing here. Okay, this A kind of it's not there. So we're assuming A isn't there. Okay, so in your textbooks it'll say A equals 1 or something like that. We have to assume A equals 1, right? But A is not there, so there's nothing in front of x squared in order to complete the square, at least for most of high school. If you have an AP class, you might delve into it a little bit, or an IB. But for the most part, you don't have anything in front of x squared, so you don't have to worry about that. All you do is you take the number in front of x, right, B, the number in front of x, divided by 2, square it, and that gives you C. All right? So let me go ahead and give you the steps, and then we'll dive into an example here. Okay? So step 0 would be to know the formula. Know the formula. Okay? The magic formula. The magic formula. AKA this thing over here that I did in like a galaxy pen. Okay, so knowing the magic formula, that's your first and foremost. Now, so the steps I'm going to give you are going to be as if you're going to solve an equation. So that's the example I'm going to give you guys is an equation that you have to solve using completing the square. Okay, and then I'll probably do some other example videos in the future on completing the square. But for right now, if we're going to solve the formula, you want to get the number to the right first. Get the number to the right first. Okay? Get all your numbers to the right. Let me say it like that instead. Get all numbers to the right. A la derecha. All right, then you got to have, well, you got to use your magic formula. So after you get all the numbers to the right, use the magic formula. I'm not going to capitalize the magic anymore. Add C to both sides. Add C to both sides. All right. Then you want to factor. Then you want to write the factor squared. And then you want to solve for x. All right. So that's pretty much it. Now, I mean, obviously there's a little bit to solving for x, so I'll show you what to do for that in a second, but let me go ahead and scroll down here and do an example with you guys. So, if you just need to find, so actually before we do this example, if you just need to find a C value, so one of the first things that they'll ask you to do for homework is maybe something like this, where they want you to have x squared plus, let's say, 4x. And they want you to find out what C is. So what's C? What's C? All right. So if we want to find out what C is, then you kind of only need a few of these steps. You do need the magic formula. And you do need to use the magic formula. You don't need to move anything over to the right. And then, of course, you need to factor, and then you want to write the factor as a thing squared. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second. So what's the magic formula again? right? B over 2 quantity squared equals C. I'll probably quiz you on it later. So if we know the magic formula, then we use the magic formula. B is 4 in this case, so 4 over 2 quantity squared equals C. All right? 4 over 2 is 2, right? So 2 squared, and 2 squared is 4, so 4 is C. Now, that's it. We're pretty much done, right? So we just have x squared plus 4x plus 4, right? Now, they might want you to write it, and this is why I have step 5 in here. Write the factor squared, okay? So actually, before we write the factor squared, we have to factor it. You don't need to use any other formulas. Sometimes teachers will have you do x plus b over 2 quantity squared as another little formula to remember. But I'm not a huge fan of formulas, so I'd rather just do what I know how to do. And if it takes pretty much the same time as using a formula, then why not? It's one less thing you have to memorize, right? So all you need to do now is just factor it. I want two things that multiply to give me 4, and they have to add to give me 4. Well, 1 and 4 won't work because 1 times 4 is 4, but 1 plus 4 is 5. So 2 and 2 are going to work. And lo and behold, 2 plus 2 is 4. Look at that. Who would have thought? And then throw an x in front. And now we factored it. And then, all right, so that was step 4. Right, step 4, factor. Step 5, we're just going to write it as x plus 2 and then put a little square here, which means x plus 2 times x plus 2. And we're done. Right? So again, it depends on which textbook you're using. If you're in public school, you'll use, whatever the most recent edition is. Private schools might use their own text, a Becker or whatever. And then homeschooling, you might have, I don't know, all kinds of different textbooks. But here's what you would do, okay? If it's just a simple example of finding C. Now, let's jump into our main example, and then we'll wrap up here. So, step 0, know the magic formula, right? Which is what? What's the magic formula? Pause it if you need to. Yeah, it's B over 2 quantity squared equals C. Muy importante, muy important, very important to know that formula. So let's go ahead and dive into a main example here. The example I want to use is this one. So actually, let me use a different color. Let me use blue. So x squared, and I'll put the steps off to the side as well. X squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 8. All right, so the goal here is to solve for x by completing the square. Now, if you don't have to complete the square, don't, because completing the square is gross. All right, but if you have to, if it's a problem you have to do on your homework or on a test or quiz or whatever, then this is what you would do. Okay, so the first thing is to know the formula. What's the formula? B over 2 quantity squared equals C. That's right. So then, step 1, get all the numbers to the right. All right, so step 1, we want to get all the numbers to the right, and that means I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. All right, so then I have x squared minus 6x. I'm going to leave a space here for the next step. You don't really have to do this. It just makes it look nicer. Step 2, use the magic formula. All right, so step 2, magic formula. B, what's B? Well, B can be -6 or 6. It doesn't really matter in this case. And the reason why is because you're squaring it. So whenever you square things, the result is always positive. So it doesn't matter if you put a 6 here or a -6. You're going to get the same answer either way. So I'm just going to put a 6 in there. And if you want to have the negative in there, you can. It doesn't matter. So 6 over 2, right? So 6 over 2 is 3, and then 3 squared is 9, so 9 is the C value. So that was step 2, use the magic formula. And now we're going to add C to both sides, step 3. All right, so step 3, add it to both sides. So I guess I didn't really need, because I could have just, added my C value to both sides up here, but I'm going to do it on the next step here, and that way you can see clearly that it's step 3 that I'm doing here. So 9 gets added to the left, but it is still an equation, so I have to add 9 to the right if I'm going to add it to the left, right, to keep it balanced. So that's why that step is so important. Then we're going to factor. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and factor. And by the way, you can do 9 plus 7. I'm not going to include that as a step because you're kind of just simplifying it real quick, so it's not really that important to write as its own step here. But I'm going to factor this 9. So 9 has just 2 unique factors, 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. 1 times 9 wouldn't work because 1 plus 9 is 10, or negative 1 plus negative 9. Either way, it does not give me negative 6. But 3 times 3 is 9. Getting close. 3 plus 3 is 6, though, so I need to make them both negative. If I add 2 negative 3's, I get a negative 6. There we go. Boom, 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 boom. And then, of course, 9 plus 7 is 16, so that goes there. All right, step 5 was to write the factor squared. All right, step 5. This is a pretty baby step. It's not a huge deal, but I kind of figured I'd write it in here just to be clear. All right, so x minus 3 quantity squared equals 16, and now we solve for x. Okay, so typically, let me add in a few sub-steps here. So typically, whenever you're solving for x, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to square root. You're going to square root both sides. Ooh, missed the D there. Square root both sides. All right, so spoiler alert, that's what we're going to do. We're going to square both sides. And then you're going to split the equations up. It's actually going to create 2 equations. So split into 2 equations. Goodness, I can't spell today. It's a good thing I know how to do math. Split into 2 equations, and then solve each for x. And that part's going to look a little different depending on what you have with your x. But for our example here, we've got, of course, x plus 3 quantity squared equals 16. So step 1 underneath the whole solve for x step would be to square root both sides. Okay, so I have x minus 3 here because the square and the square root cancel. All right, so the reason why that happens is because, like, for instance, if I said 3 squared square root, that would be the same thing as the square root of 9, which is 3. And that happens with every number. I mean, not 4 to the 4th power. 4 squared square root would be the same thing as the square root of 16, which is 4. Right? So there's a pattern here. Anytime I take a number and I square it and then I square root it, I just get back to that same number. Okay? So since that's true all the time, even with x minus 3, because no matter what x is, it's going to give me a number, right? So little side note there. And then, of course, I get plus or minus 4 here. And the reason why is because whatever x minus 3 is, whatever this thing is, I need to square it and get 16. So it's 4, right? 4 squared is 16. But so is negative 4. If I take negative 4 and I square it, it's the same thing as negative 4 times negative 4, which is positive 16. Right? So that's why whenever you take the square root of both sides, you have to add a plus or minus. Okay? Because this x minus 3 thing can be 4 or negative 4. Right? So that was the first step under solve for x. So square root both sides. Now we're going to split it into 2 equations because there's 2 things going on here. There's a plus 4 version and there's a minus 4 version. So let's split it up. So here's the plus 4 version. And here's the minus 4 version. Okay? So then the last final step. Absolutely. I don't know why I said that. Just to say it twice, I guess. Solve each for x. Okay, we're going to solve each thing for x. And there's only one more step here. All right, so we're almost done. I know it's a super long problem. I want to make sure I give you an accurate problem that you might see that's more complicated. And that way, if you need to use this video to help you understand how to do an easier problem, then that works as well. Okay, so all I just did while I was chatting was adding 3 to both sides. So I just added 3 to both sides in both equations. So then I have x equals 7, right? 4 plus 3. And then over here, careful with your negatives. Negative 4 plus 3 is the opposite of 4 minus 3, which would be negative 1. Okay? And then, so I'm going to actually, This is the last step. We're done. But sometimes if you have, so I'll leave this as like an asterisk here. Kind of threw out my -1 here. So asterisks. If the initial, and this doesn't really apply to completing the square as much to other stuff, but just in case you run into this problem. If the initial problem, okay, if the initial problem has like 1 over x or like the square root of x, or like a log of x, then check solutions, right? Meaning x equals. Check solutions after you solve. Okay, so we didn't have any 1 over x kind of things or square roots or any of that. We did some square roots to solve, but we didn't start with any of that stuff. So we don't really have to worry about plugging it back in. Now, it is still a good idea to plug it back in and check. It's a good way to check your work, because when you plug in x equals 7 and x equals -1 into the very original thing we started with here, this guy, if you can plug it back in and it works, then it works for sure, right? Assuming you plugged it back in and did the math right, of course. But yeah, if you have time for it, I would recommend doing it, especially if it's a very serious test like SAT math or whatever, something like that, okay? So that is how you complete the square. It all boils down to knowing this magic formula. If you know this magic formula, b over 2 quantity squared equals c, then you're good to go. All right, I'm thinking about doing a bonus video on like where the formula comes from. I might put that out sometime this week as an extra video, but normally I put out these videos on Mondays, sometime in the afternoon. Either I'll schedule them for 4, or just whenever I get it done in the evening. Yeah, so one more thing before we go. Of course, if you like the video, give it a like. If you want to see more of these videos, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. But I have a PDF that I want to give you for free. It's just a quick guide on math in general, just basically how to understand like how to not make math mistakes anymore. So it's kind of like the 5 things that you need to know in order to not make any math mistakes anymore. So it's titled pretty much that. It's the 5 math mistakes everyone makes and how to avoid them. It's free to download. It's on my website. Just go there and grab it. I'm working on the automation for it right now, so you won't get it like right away, but once I automate the email to send, then it'll send it to you in an email. So look for that shortly if you go there and download that PDF. All right, this has been Mr. Myers at Myers Mathematics. Oh, one more thing. If you want to see another video, go ahead and throw a comment in the comments below, and I will make sure I make you a video on that topic. Peace out.